Welcome everybody to the last session of this week's conference. You made it. We will do our best to keep you engaged, or I will do my best to keep you engaged, especially you folks on the East Coast who probably have one foot out the door already to the weekend. We want you to hang on to the end though, because we have a very good and interesting scenario to discuss with you that's based on a true story. So I hope you'll be able to hang on to the end. So the presenters for this session, again, myself, I am Duncan Yetman. I'm in the Entitlement Communities Division of the Office of Block Grant Assistance and CPD at HUD. Track B, you see there the other providers of this session. Just a couple of housekeeping notes as we've done for almost all of these sessions. The PowerPoint presentations, they're going to be available on the HUD Exchange after the conference. You can submit questions at the bottom of the screen in the Q&A below your screen. For technical questions, please use the chat. Use the Q&A for content questions. Technical questions, use the chat. And we are going to have a number of poll questions, some of them all grouped together at the end when we discuss the scenario. If you want, and if it's easier for you, we suggest you use the Slido app to assist you in terms of accessing those questions and polls. You can download that on your phone, or if you have a separate monitor, you can use Slido on a separate monitor from where the presentation is being offered here. So let's begin with our discussion of monitoring today. Monitoring is the principal means by which the department ensures that programs and technical areas are carried out efficiently, effectively, and in compliance with applicable laws and regulations. It assists program participants in improving their performance, developing or increasing their capacity, and augmenting their management and technical skills. And then finally, monitoring allows you to stay abreast of the efficacy of the programs that you're administering and the technical areas within your community that these programs serve. So a much more detailed definition of monitoring, and we mentioned this in the Monitoring for CARES Act program session on Monday, a much more detailed definition may be found in Chapter 1 of the CPD Monitoring Handbook. So the focus of this presentation is going to be on subrecipient monitoring. As the underlying text on this slide indicates, you, the HUD grantee, you have the ultimate responsibility for the proper administration of your CDBG and your CDBG-CV grant program. Several presentations earlier this week, primarily on Monday, focused on what to expect and how to prepare when HUD monitors for CDBG, ESG, and HOPWA CARES Act funding. We're going to talk about CDBG only in this session and touch on CDBG-CV, and we're going to focus on your own monitoring of your subrecipients. So before we go any further, I want to highlight two essential resources for you to use in monitoring and managing your subrecipients. Both of these guides, Managing CDBG and Playing by the Rules, were recently updated and posted to the HUD Exchange last month. Refer to both of these guides regularly as you proceed with monitoring your subrecipients. So the next few slides will review some key points about why monitoring not only subrecipients is critical to your program success, but also to your daily operations. Whether it's your administrative and financial systems, your staffing, your procurement and contracting activities, or even other departments and agencies within your jurisdiction. So in addition to the items mentioned on the previous slide, implementation, remember, of these activities do not relieve you of your responsibilities for administration of the program. And monitoring is the primary tool by which we do that. Monitoring focuses on both program and project performance, and we'll get into in a bit in the different types of monitoring that you do with your grantees. So let's go to our first poll question. What's the most valuable monitoring tool available to you to monitor your subrecipients? So just enter a word. What is that tool, or a couple of words? What's that tool? And we're gonna have a word cloud here and see what your answers are. You take a minute here just to enter what's in the poll question down below the screen. The agreement. Okay. Any other thoughts on that? Email, communication is definitely key. We have several votes for communication, it looks like, based on the size of that hand cloud. The CPD monitoring handbook, very good tool. The uniform guidance, quarterly reports. Yes, certainly that is a big help. We have a number of answers here. This is great. But I want to highlight documentation. Okay, so there's one I want to highlight that you have that is fairly prominent, not the most prominent here, but is fairly prominent. And it's been presented in a couple different forms, and that is the subrecipient agreement. Yes, it is the subrecipient agreement that's the most important tool that you have available to you when it comes to monitoring. And I'll discuss that in the context of the different types of monitorings on the next slide. So if we can go back to the presentation.
I think you were sharing, if you want to just.
I need to share my screen again. Okay. All right. Okay, very good. So looking at the next slide, these are the three types of monitoring. Let's talk, subrecipients and subrecipient agreements were discussed elsewhere in this training. So we're not going to get too much into the weeds about a subrecipient agreement itself and its required elements, but I do want to talk about one element of the subrecipient agreement as it relates to all three of these levels of monitoring that you can engage in. With regard to administrative and financial monitoring, your subrecipient agreement, the key piece of information there is your statement of work. The statement of work sets forth your budget, your schedule, what's going to happen, what are the various duties and responsibilities of both you as a grantee and your subrecipients. What is to be accomplished by this particular activity that you have engaged a subrecipient to perform. So if you're doing administrative and financial monitoring, you're looking at the costs incurred and you're corroborating those costs incurred, those invoices that you receive from your subrecipient, with the statement of work, with the budget that you have in your subrecipient agreement. So the statement of work is a very key piece of that. What about program monitoring? Again, the statement of work, the record and record keeping and reporting portions of your subrecipient agreement, that will indicate the responsibilities between you and your subrecipient, how you're dividing that work to ensure that the activity as envisioned and as actually implemented meets all of the HUD requirements. And then finally, with regard to project monitoring, you need to be sure that the projects that you're engaged in, that there is a good division of responsibilities between you and your subrecipient for meeting not only CDBG regulations, but also the other federal requirements. You may feel with a particular subrecipient, gee, this is a construction project for which Davis-Bacon and the federal labor standards apply, but I don't have a high degree of confidence in XYZ subrecipient's ability to monitor compliance with those provisions, to check certified payrolls, to do employee interviews on occasion on the site, et cetera, and so forth. So you may decide that in your subrecipient agreement, you're giving the subrecipient some latitude with this project, but you're going to handle Davis-Bacon compliance. This is something that you have to decide based upon the experience and the capacity of the subrecipients that you're working with. And again, this is all set forth in your statement of work: the budget, the schedule, the division of labor for seeing this project successfully through. So I would point you to one particular aspect of our regulations and of the subrecipient agreement. When we speak of the statement of work in the subrecipient agreement, in our regulations, 24 CFR 570.503B1 has this language: these items shall be in sufficient detail to provide a sound basis for the recipient to effectively monitor performance under the agreement. So the statement of work has to have that detail in it. And if it has that detail in it, if it has that detailed budget, that schedule, what the scope of the project is, the better you're going to be able to better monitor the subrecipient's performance over the long haul. So how frequently you monitor a subrecipient is based on the non-compliance risk that a subrecipient poses. Risk of non-compliance with federal statutes, regulations, and the terms and conditions of the subaward, in other words, the subrecipient agreement, may be dependent on several factors. More frequent monitoring may be appropriate based on the type and complexity of the CDBG activity or the experience and capacity of the CDBG subrecipient. The uniform guidance requires grantees to perform a risk assessment of their subrecipients based on at least 4 factors. And we'll get into those on the next slide here. This is the risk assessment that a grantee is required to do of its subrecipients at a minimum. You as a grantee may decide that you want to add more risk assessment factors to this list. You are free to do that at your discretion. It may, for you to do that, may better reflect your evaluation of the non-compliance risk posed by a particular subrecipient or your group of subrecipients. We will talk in a minute about how your own monitoring plan would incorporate your own set of risk factors. But the 4 listed here, those are the minimum. So the question is come up, whether this risk assessment is something that is conducted annually. It may be inferred from other statutory language on monitoring found in the Housing and Community Development Act and elsewhere. But for now, regardless of whether the requirement is annual or not, please become familiar with this section of the uniform guidance that applies to your CDBG grant. Now that we know that risk assessments are required, how do we go about making monitoring part of your daily work? Well, include monitoring in your work plan for the year. You may do this by including a monitoring strategy in your overall office work plan for your CDBG grant. Larger grantees may want to establish a separate monitoring plan. So what's included in a good monitoring strategy and plan? You see some of the items here that are recommended. Don't forget to include monitoring checklists and sample monitoring letters listed at the bottom there. This will help ensure that your strategy and plan has long-term usefulness beyond your tenure with the grantee or the CDBG program, should you move on. And by all means, use the Managing CDBG Guidebook and the CPD Monitoring Handbook to help in the development of the plan, in identifying the documentation that you'll need to review, and informing the right questions to ask. So for those of you who are on for our Monday morning session on CDBG-CV monitoring, you'll see that these steps look remarkably similar to those that HUD follows in monitoring you, the grantee. So again, Chapter 2 of the CPD Monitoring Handbook is a very useful resource in this regard in terms of putting together your whole monitoring strategy and following and implementing these steps for a successful monitoring outcome. Okay, might need to pick up the pace here because I want to leave enough time for us to discuss at the end. So your pre-monitoring preparation, you have to be very careful with reviewing some subrecipient information. Some file review will require a good deal of prep work. These are some of the items that you're definitely going to want to review before you go in and see one of your subrecipients. But be sure that the subrecipient is aware of exactly what information you need and the files you need to review. I can remember one situation with a subrecipient wherein I needed, to review the eligibility files for the participants in this program. This was a school-based health center. And the director of the center wasn't aware that I was going to actually have to open files and look in them because the files had HIPAA information. And she hadn't prepared the files adequately to separate out the HIPAA information so it wouldn't be visible to me during the course of the monitoring. She didn't realize I was going to actually have to look inside the files until I got to the site for the monitoring that day. So we had to postpone the monitoring because that was going to take significant amount of work on her part to separate out that HIPAA information, that PII, that personally identifiable information from the eligibility information that was found in the file. So make sure that your subrecipients are fully aware of exactly what you're going to need to look at. With regard to CDBG-CV monitoring, we mentioned this on Monday morning, and I'll repeat it here for those who weren't there. But you may decide, and you may have already started, monitoring your CDBG-CV subrecipients. And if you've started that, or you're thinking about doing that, you've done so without a CDBG-CV monitoring exhibit being available to you in the CPD monitoring handbook. So you've had to develop your own monitoring checklist. And our suggestion to you is to use the existing annual formula CDBG monitoring exhibits that mirror the CDBG-CV activity. And also add to that duplication of benefit questions and PPR tieback questions as appropriate. And you can reference those slides from the Monday morning session when those all the post-conference materials get posted to the HUD Exchange. So again, we went through some things about pre-monitoring preparation. And I just want to highlight as well that IDIS reports are very valuable to you. They can assist in your pre-monitoring preparation. Here are some of the reports that you can use as a local CDBG program manager to monitor your subrecipients. These reports are especially helpful to you if you, as the state or local CDBG program manager, you don't have copies of invoices or other financial information submitted by subrecipients. That may have all been handled. You're a large grantee, and that was all handled by somebody over in the finance department. And you don't have access to those invoices. You just know they get paid when they're submitted. You know, there's a checks and balances there. You okay it, but you don't actually perhaps maybe see the dollar amounts on a regular basis because it's something that your finance department handles. So these reports are especially valuable to you especially, you know, if your finance department is not even co-located with you in the same building within your jurisdiction. Utilize these IDIS reports for monitoring. So when we talk about your pre-monitoring preparation, and before we get into the exit conference, I do want to say one thing about working with your subrecipients, and in particular, CV subrecipients. As we've noted in other parts in other sessions this week, the pandemic has caused us to do many things that heretofore we have not even considered under CDBG. It's caused us to pursue many uncommon activities. And so so how that translates to you in terms of your relationship with subrecipients is in many cases, you're not dealing with the usual suspects. You're dealing with a whole new group of nonprofits that you probably have not maybe worked with before. And if that's the case, remember that just as HUD wants to be regarded by you, the grantee, as a trusted advisor in carrying out your CDBG program, you do as well want to foster a good relationship with your subrecipients and ensure that it is a supportive working partnership to effectively implement your program. Remember, the primary goal is to assist your subrecipients to achieve program goals while ensuring that their activity complies with CDBG requirements and other federal rules and regulations. So think about that as you're notifying in whatever type of notification, whether it's an email, a formal letter, whatever you send to your subrecipient to let them know that you're coming for the monitoring visit. So the entrance conference is much the same as with HUD, when we visit you as a grantee, the Managing CDBG Guidebook suggests that you may even want to have a pre-monitoring conference. And again, this would be very helpful for those CDBG-CV grantees who may be completely new, never used CDBG funds before, except now in the instance of the pandemic. That in that pre-monitoring conference, you would take the time to explain the monitoring procedures and the reasons for the visit, and even why they, as a particular subrecipient, was selected at this particular time, why they were selected at this time. Many subrecipients, especially those receiving federal dollars for the first time, they need a better grasp of this process. So consider the advice in the Managing CDBG Guidebook about doing a pre-monitoring conference with your subrecipient. So as you conduct the monitoring, again, this is the meat of what you're doing. You're conducting staff interviews, you're doing file reviews. You need to establish, and you're repeating this over and over. You're evaluating, you're communicating what you found, you're documenting what you found with the subrecipient, and you're repeating that process as you go through the files and the documentation that the subrecipient has provided you. You must be sure that grantees have a clear record of the information provided and discussed and reviewed with the CDBG subrecipient staff. And it behooves you to have a checklist of all the necessary information required for the monitoring visit, available for your use and the use of your subrecipient. Just a brief word here about sampling. Again, we would refer you to Chapter 2 of the CPD Monitoring Handbook for guidance about sampling. For most of your subrecipients, there's rarely ample time to review every project or activity record. Sampling is going to be a must. So please become familiar with how to conduct that and how to implement sampling to make your life easier. So the exit conference, at the end of the monitoring visit, you're going to meet to discuss the key findings. These are the preliminary findings of your monitoring visit. And it is an opportunity for a subrecipient to correct areas of CDBG program noncompliance. So give them that opportunity. Don't shut the door on that opportunity during the course of the exit conference, but give them ample opportunity to respond to your preliminary conclusions. So we discussed this also on Monday morning. Monitoring conclusions and follow-up, you basically can have 5 different monitoring results. And you want to be sure that the subrecipient, at the conclusion of the monitoring visit, is provided with a written notification of the findings that occurred, that were identified during the monitoring visit. That letter, it must set deadlines for a written response. And it must set forth a corrective action that the subrecipient should comply with. In many cases, you may want to give the subrecipient an option for how it is going to, an option for developing a corrective action with regard to a particular deficiency in implementing the program. They are the boots on the ground, if you will. They probably have a better sense of how to implement a corrective action. And in many cases, they very well may have a better sense of how to implement a corrective action than you do, the grantee. So be open to their thoughts on that. And if it's puzzling to you as to the appropriate corrective action to apply in a particular situation, ask them how they would address that deficiency. So in applying corrective actions, there are 3 levels of corrective actions that you might want to consider applying based on the severity of the noncompliance. Remember that most subrecipient noncompliance stems from the following 2 causes, which are the same causes, not coincidentally, with grantees and HUD. There's no policy or procedure in place, or it's inadequate, or it's not followed in terms of implementing the activity, or there is a lack of staff capacity. Staff needs training. They need supervisory oversight, or there's some staffing gap that inhibits subrecipient compliance. So we'll go through a couple of these interventions. These low-level interventions are the ones that are probably most appropriate and the ones you will use the most often in terms of addressing deficiencies in program performance. Most of these involve training and technical assistance, you working one-on-one with the subrecipient to get them back on the straight and narrow road. If it seems like the deficiency is more severe, you may want to consider some moderate level interventions or even some high level interventions. Remember the monitoring clause that we had talked about earlier, 24.570.501B. These interventions stem from the language used in that monitoring clause. And I'm going to just reference that right now, that section of our regulations. It says here in 501B, the recipient is responsible for determining the adequacy of performance under subrecipient agreements. Again, that's why those are so key, and procurement contracts, and for taking appropriate action when performance problems arise, such as the actions described in 570.910. Well, what is 570.910? That provides all the corrective and remedial actions available to HUD to correct your noncompliance in the event of a finding. So these interventions here are some of the same corrective actions that HUD would apply to you as a grantee. So that's where these are borrowed from, if you will. You may want to suspend their participation in the program, not renew the activity, terminate them, even possibly initiate legal action. Certainly a moderate level interaction restricting their payments. disallowing certain expenses, establishing new reimbursement review requirements that the grantee has to submit additional backup documentation with invoices over and above maybe what had been stated in a statement of work. Some of these corrective actions may require an amendment to your subrecipient agreement. And so also you want to provide technical assistance to your grantees. Technical assistance provided before a subrecipient agreement is even signed and funds are spent can pay enormous dividends. There are many ways that HUD has seen grantees do this. Individual agency or group orientation sessions at the beginning of a funding cycle. That is an excellent way of doing that. And then just providing, as I said, as part of one of those low-level interventions, training and technical assistance one-on-one with a grantee. And remember, there's nothing like teaching to develop your own understanding of a subject. Teaching a subrecipient, in this case, how to comply with CDBG and other federal requirements. So we have about 20 minutes to discuss this scenario, which I'm very happy for, because we have a number of poll questions based on this scenario. You see it up here on your screen. I'm going to read it out loud as well, just to allow you to get some time to think about it. And I'm going to ask some poll questions. There are no right and wrong answers. That is the beauty of this scenario. But the scenario, as I mentioned at the top of our presentation, it is based on a true story. Things happen sometimes. So we're going to read this scenario and get your thoughts on it via the poll questions. Here we go. City Senior Center has long been recognized as a vital social service and recreational resource in the community. Fred Funhouse, the City Community Development Director, has not visited the City Senior Center, the CSC, for a monitoring visit in several years. The new CSC Executive Director, Tammy Toogood, has been described in the local media as a go-getter who looks under every rock for ways to support additional activities at the center. So becoming aware of the Part 200 risk assessment requirement at a HUD training 2 months ago, Fred decides to make what he believes will be a very routine monitoring visit to the CSC. The most recent CDBG grant was for a new roof for the building. CDBG funds paid for 50% of the roof. The rest came from local funding. Fred did not visit the CSC during the roof replacement, as the city engineer assured him that he had everything under control. Those city engineers, they don't want us community development people, hanging around their projects and sites and everything, but whatever. So anyway, we'll go on. As he approached the CSC on this occasion, he notices a big banner hangs from the building announcing the local high school's senior prom for later that evening. Entering the building, he sees that much of the space is being used for a children's daycare center. A small room in the back of the building is where activities for senior citizens are held. Ms. Toogood acknowledges that they had to shift some other activities that generated more revenue to help keep the lights on. Senior activities are now only scheduled on weekends, which Fred verifies by looking at the monthly calendar of activities posted on Ms. Toogood's office door. All right, so our first poll question for you all. And again, provide your answers in the poll below your screen. What's the problem or issue here? Let me see, lack of monitoring. The building's not being used in a way acceptable to CDBG. Okay, any other ideas here? What are some other issues? What's the, just the one response to that first question? Okay, change in use, not a senior center anymore. Yeah, you could say that. There may be a sign out front that says City Senior Center, but in actuality, it's not a senior center. It may very well have been a senior center when it was originally funded with CDBG many years ago, or when it was acquired maybe, and rehab for use as a senior center, whatever the issue, but there's a lack of oversight, and change in use, lack of monitoring. Yep, there's a lack of monitoring. That's a definite problem. Okay, so let's go on to the next question. What did our friend Fred, what has he done correctly though? Given this situation, what has he done correctly? Let's get your answer for that question. He's assumed too much. That's something that he's done incorrectly, right? But what has he done correctly? He made a site visit. Yeah, well, at least he finally got there, right? So he's done that correctly. What else has he done correctly from what you can, from reading the scenario? He attended a HUD training on risk assessments. He did that correctly. And he didn't just take those training materials and have them collect dust on a shelf. He actually acted and initiated and went to the center based upon the information he received at that risk assessment training. So the materials from that training didn't just sit on a shelf. He actually implemented something. So he did that. And you know, he eventually did get down to the center to visit it and see what was going on. Was he done incorrectly? Let's go to question 3. What has Fred done incorrectly? And some of you have already noted this in the previous question. He hadn't monitored in several years, right? Oh, also another thing that he has done correctly, he did look at documentation. He kind of approached the site like a police officer. He looked around, he saw what was going on, he noticed the sign for the senior prom, he noticed the schedule of activities on Ms. Toogood's office door. So he used some keen observation skills, if you call it that, once he eventually got to the center. That is one thing he did do correctly, yes. But what he's done incorrectly, yes, some of you have noted here, he leaned on the city engineer instead of doing the monitoring himself, right? If he went down there, he would have seen immediately that there was a non-compliant activity within the building for which they were doing a roof repair on. This roof repair was subject to Davis-Bacon in all likelihood. In fact, I can tell you it probably was. It was. Was the city engineer going to handle reviewing certified payrolls or conducting employee interviews with workers on the site? Probably not. So he should have been visiting the site with some frequency. How frequent depends upon the size of the project, the dollar amount of the project, the other projects that are in the city's portfolio. There's no hard and fast rule as to how often you should visit a site. But if workers are getting paid weekly and you're doing certified payroll review on a weekly basis, you probably want to visit the site more than once during the course of construction, especially for something like a new roof to a building. So there are some things that he's done incorrectly here. We've identified that. He's taken someone else's word for the improvements. Yes. Didn't have any, maybe he didn't have any checklists available. Right, exactly. Yeah. So let's go to question 4. What has the subrecipient done correctly or incorrectly, for that matter? What have they done correctly or incorrectly? Let's get both of those together here in this question. Type your answer in the poll. Okay, not seeing anything in there, but I can tell you that, so Tammy, obviously, she's a wheeler dealer, right? You can tell that from the description here of the scenario that she's juking and jiving. And a lot of your subrecipients are in that situation. They're small nonprofits. They're robbing Peter to pay Paul. They are always looking under every rock for every possible dollar. And if the dollar doesn't fit with what they want to do, well, they'll somehow make it fit, you know? That's just the nature of the nonprofit world, especially for small nonprofits. So she's done a lot of things without consulting with the city, without consulting Fred as to whether it's allowable or doable under the course of work. She's just looking for money, and she's not really considering the strings that are attached to that money. So, you know, those are many of the things that Tammy has done wrong, right? Obviously, we'll get into some of the things that you're mentioning here for what's wrong here in terms of national objective. So let's go to the last question here. Would you have reasonable cause to issue a finding or a concern in this matter? Why or why not? So you can answer just yes or no, or you can answer, you know, however you think is appropriate. And we'll have a little bit of a discussion on that, and then we'll close out our session with some additional questions if you have them. Yes, it probably is reasonable to issue a finding. Definitely, absolutely. Its project is not serving an eligible population. It qualified for CDBG funding as a senior center, and yet seniors are only being served in a small portion of the building, and that only on weekends. Yeah, scope of activities were changed. Definitely not meeting a national objective. So let's discuss briefly what are some ways in which this can be addressed. So as you know, those of you who are experienced CDBG grantees, there are special policies that govern the use of facilities. And if a facility, such as the city senior center, has both eligible and ineligible uses within it, then there are some things that you need to do in terms of prorating the use of CDBG dollars for assistance to that public facility. And that's what has to be done in this instance. CDBG dollars paid for 50% of the roof, but they probably, you know, based upon our description here, maybe are only eligible to be spent on maybe 10% of the roof. So there are many ineligible activities in this building that are being assisted with CDBG. Now, you can imagine that this type of finding that would likely require, certainly for the city senior services to repay the senior center to repay some CDBG funding, would throw Ms. Too Good into a tailspin, or send her into a tailspin. So what are some of the things that could possibly happen here? Well, we noted in the scenario that most of the space is being used by a child daycare center. Is there the potential, maybe not in the immediate future, but after the dust settles, to possibly have that child daycare center qualify for CDBG funding? Maybe that Tammy, in her enthusiasm for getting things squared away and not consulting with Fred, it may be that she didn't even know that CDBG funding could assist child daycare activities. So there may be an opportunity for a change in the scope of work here, right? That's which someone noted here as an answer to the poll question. Tammy, too bad. Yeah, there can be, there may be an opportunity to work with the subrecipient to provide technical assistance and to ensure that all the activities at this center are CDBG program compliant. There are different ways of approaching this. There are different, certainly there should be a finding made because it's not serving an eligible population from initially, but the corrective action that you pursue, it could be maybe less severe than originally thought if the child daycare center could qualify. Yeah, and someone has noted in the poll questions that, you know, if it's not a low and moderate income area, you could certainly change the intake forms for the parents who are at that center to determine, you know, low and moderate income eligibility. So these are the kinds of things that you're thinking about as, and again, true scenario, as you're monitoring your subrecipients, always having a watchful eye, looking to ways in which you can work with your subrecipient to ensure the successful performance of them and compliance with CDBG and federal requirements. So thank you for that. We're going to go back to, I'm going to go back to the slides and now just, you know, take your questions. Whoops. First of all, I'm going to take your questions. If you have any, just put them in the Q&A there. I do see some in the Q&A right now. So I'm going to click on that. Okay. How does one do monitoring during pandemic? Well, you would do that basically remotely. In most cases, like HUD right now, you're doing remote monitoring. You're asking grantees for files. You're asking them to send emails. You have much of the information on your grantee, on your subrecipient rather, in your program files in your office, or perhaps on your laptop or on your hard drive. There may be additional file information about the clients and the beneficiaries that they've been serving that you need to obtain. But remember that monitoring, even if you're not able to go out to the site, monitoring is a continuous control. It's something that you do when you pay an invoice. It's something that you do when you check to make sure that your subrecipient's expenditure of funds is on target to expend all the grant by the end of the grant term, that they haven't blown through the entire budget, the entire annual budget in 2 months. It's something that you do on a regular day-to-day basis. So think about that. Think about monitoring in a broader context, not just in terms of a site visit to the subrecipient. Okay, so do you have any guidance on conveying not so good monitoring results for internal activities? Program staff are adamant they're documenting sufficiently, but monitoring reveals otherwise. The executive director doesn't like to hear internal activities are not compliant. So internal activities, I'm assuming that's policies and procedures that they're not following. They're not following their administrative and financial management procedures that they may have shared with you. They may have shared with you a policies and procedures document. They may have shared with you their set of internal controls, but somehow they're not following that. I think what you want to do for starters is to talk to the executive director, who doesn't seem to like to hear this, and get their idea for resolving this deficiency. Talk to them directly, get their idea for how to resolve this deficiency for starters. You need to clearly document it. As we said before in one slide, your file review, you're evaluating, you're communicating, again, talk to the executive director, and you're documenting. And you repeat that over and over and over. Okay, let's move on here because it is 6 o'clock. So I'm not going to be able to get to all of these questions, but I'll try and get a couple more in here. So not only do program project subrecipients need to keep paper folders for review, we, the PJ program manager, need to keep paper documents for HUD to monitor us too, correct? Versus all electronic means. No, if your documents are electronic, that's sufficient for HUD's purposes. If they are the actual record, that's sufficient. There's not a need for paper backup unless there's some discrepancy, right? If there is some discrepancy, if there is some transposing of numbers, let's say the electronic version differs from the paper version, or you have a copy of a check and the check doesn't match what the invoice says. That would be a question where maybe you want to go back to the paper record. But there's electronic records should be sufficient in most cases to conduct monitoring. Is there a typical percentage of subrecipient files that should be reviewed regardless of sampling method? What you can do in the time available to you. For that school-based health center I mentioned earlier, at the time I was working for a CDBG grantee that had 1.25 full-time equivalents managing a $600,000 CDBG grant with 1.25 full-time equivalents. I was the one, and I had a quarter-time administrative assistant. I didn't have time to spend an entire week or even 2 consecutive days with one subrecipient. So I spaced it out. I visited that particular subrecipient every Wednesday afternoon for 2 hours for a month. That's what I did. And that was valuable because that time, actually, the way I did that time that I spent with them, I was able to communicate what I was finding. And when I came the next Wednesday, they were able to show me the corrections that they had made and how they improved upon what I was communicating with them in terms of their record keeping and their reporting. So you need to handle it the way that works best for you. And I'll leave it at that as far as how you would handle that. Virtual signatures on forms, are they valid during the pandemic? If you can confirm in some way a signature, that is ideal. That would be best if you can do that. I don't know if HUD or CDBG has a particular, quote, signature policy, unquote. So I'm not going to really address that question here. I'll address one more question, and then we are going to wrap up this session and the conference. And I apologize to those of you who, you know, I have not been able to get to your questions. So this question here has got, how many votes does it have? It's got 2 votes, so I'll answer it. I am new. I have nonprofits that are housed in public facilities. They have repaid their rehab loans. I was informed that they need to be monitored in perpetuity. Is this correct? Can you provide me the reg or code? I have not found a period of performance agreement. Well, first of all, I'm a little concerned that you haven't found an agreement. You should have some type of agreement in place with that subrecipient. That should have survived some years. But with regard to nonprofits, record keeping requirements do differ. It's usually 5 years from the termination of the subrecipient agreement. You can reference our grant administration section of Part 570, which is 570, 500, 501, 502, 503. Reference all of that material there for information about subrecipients and how they can best meet the period performance requirements. You provide the reg for levels of corrective actions. So our remedial and corrective actions, that they are, again, they're found in 570.910. Those are the ones that HUD uses. And we encourage you to adapt those to your situation and apply them as necessary to your subrecipients. There's one here with 4. Wow, okay. So I'm gonna have to answer this, and then this will be the last one, I promise. Do you have any tips or best practices for the financial management systems part of the managing CDBG monitoring checklist? Most questions seem to demand expertise of a professional accountant or auditor. Is it recommended to outsource to an accountant? I would say no. I would say, as a program manager of the CDBG program within your jurisdiction, you should be able to work your way through your own version of a financial management form that you can use with your subrecipients. And this is very simple. This is, you know, checking invoices, checking canceled checks, checking other aspects of financial performance in terms of who is signing the checks. Are the requirements in terms of submitting invoices with backup documentation, is all of that being followed in accordance with the subrecipient's own policies and procedures and what you've laid out in your reporting and record keeping requirements within your subrecipient agreement? This should all be in easy to understand, simple language. So if you're having problems interpreting some of what is available in those checklists, by all means, raise your hand. You may be that may be an opportunity for HUD to provide you with technical assistance to help you better manage the financial management piece of your CDBG program. So with that, I'm going to end our session today. I thank you for your attention. Again, any questions I haven't answered here or haven't been able to address, you've got 2 CFR. I'm sorry, you have chapter 2 rather of the CPD monitoring handbook. You have those 2 guidebooks for managing your subrecipients, managing CDBG, and playing by the rules. So I encourage you to use those and refer to those to get up to speed on what you need to do to monitor your subrecipients. At this point, we are going to conclude the conference, this session and the conference. And I want to thank all of you so much for participating this week. We've had record attendance at this conference. We're very excited to have heard from all of you, to receive your questions and your enthusiasm for the CDBG and the CDBG-CV program and all of the programs at CPD that are address the pandemic, whether it's CDBG or ESG or HOPWA. And we also want to thank our TA providers, our multiple TA providers who stepped up to the plate in a very quick time frame to assist us with the presentation of this conference. And especially a big shout out to our friends, our conference vendor, CDM, who worked with Plum and certainly dealt with our various issues and technical issues with grace and with style throughout the entire conference. We also want to thank all the HUD staff. I want to thank all the HUD staff who participated, who asked questions, and who presented throughout the 5 days of the conference. So thank you to one and all for your participation. Again, we will have these materials available on HUD Exchange soon. There is a process. There's always a process in the federal government. Come on now. There's a process that we need to go through to make these materials 508 compliant, et cetera. But you will be seeing them on a HUD Exchange shortly. We will certainly be getting listservs out to those of you who are on the various listservs for our CPD programs to make you aware of their availability when they are posted on the HUD Exchange. So again, thank you for your participation this week and have a wonderful weekend. Bye-bye.